This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to China Global Television Network. This is The World Today. I'm Hannah Viviers in Nairobi. Here are your top stories. The Chinese and Russian presidents meet virtually. We'll take a closer look at key points of that meeting. The death toll from COVID tops 800,000 in the United States, reportedly the highest in the world. And death toll in Haiti tanker explosion rises to more than 60. Well, Chinese President Xi Jinping has met with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin via video link. It's their first virtual meeting since June. China's foreign ministry says the two leaders will summarize the development of bilateral relations and cooperative achievements. They will also discuss major international and regional issues of mutual concern. A Kremlin spokesperson says the two presidents will exchange views on international affairs, especially recent tensions on the European continent. Well, for more on the latest, let's check in with our correspondent Julia Chapman, who's standing by for us in Moscow. Hi there, Julia. The meeting is just ended. What were the major highlights of that meeting, Julia?
According to the Kremlin, the two leaders called their relationship between Russia and China a model for the 21st century. They discussed a range of bilateral cooperation areas, from energy to industry to technology, all parts that they have been closely collaborating on in the last year and many years going back. But it's certainly true that 2021 has been a good year for Russia-China trade as the two countries move towards a goal of $200 billion in annual turnover by 2024. Now that goal remains some way off, but after the dip in trade last year because of the pandemic, there has been a pretty strong recovery this year, with President Putin noting that in the first 10 months of this year, trade was up 30% on 2019 levels to about $123 billion this year so far. But certainly there were other areas of discussion as well, namely international affairs. They talked about Afghanistan and a number of areas where their positions align, which of course is a list that is growing. Russia and China increasingly becoming more politically aligned, and President Putin referred to collaboration between the two countries in a number of spheres, including at the UN Security Council, the SCO, and BRICS formats as well. So certainly lots of collaboration between Russia and China, despite the fact that this is only the second video call between the two leaders this year.
Julia, how significant are China's relations with Russia?
They are increasingly important to Russia. President Vladimir Putin, in his introductory remarks at these talks today, called Xi Jinping a dear friend. And certainly the relationship between the two leaders themselves is very warm, and increasingly the two countries as well, with Russia becoming more dependent on China as it becomes increasingly isolated from the West. It's certainly true that tensions between Russia and the West have been rising. They're never very good, but in the last month or so they have been getting more precarious, with the West accusing Russia of preparing to stage an invasion of Ukraine, something that Russia explicitly denies. But China is an increasingly important partner for Russia. This year marks the 20th anniversary of the Russia-China Treaty on Friendship and Good Neighborliness that has been extended for another 5 years. And it really just underscores the fact that these are two very powerful countries that are being brought closer together and certainly becoming more important to one another as time goes on.
Julia, thank you so much for all those details. Julia Chapman speaking to us from Russia's capital, Moscow. Well, the heads of state of China and Russia have maintained frequent contact this year. Cooperation is strong in politics, trade, science, energy, and the military. Wang Haiyang has more.
This year marks the 20th anniversary of the China-Russia Treaty of Good Neighborliness and Friendly Cooperation. Both sides have celebrated the milestone, while their leaders have made and kept close contact. In May, via video link, the two presidents witnessed the groundbreaking ceremony of a bilateral nuclear power project in northeast China. The plan to build 4 power plants is their biggest joint venture in the sector. In June, they met virtually again to jointly announce the extension of the cooperation treaty.
The two countries' close cooperative relationship has used multilateralism in the United Nations, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, BRICS, Belt and Road Initiative to help resolve pressing global issues. The extension of the Friendship Treaty signifies an unprecedented high level for bilateral ties and an unwavering way forward for the two powers in a positive and healthy manner.
In August, the leaders held a phone conversation to discuss ties and the Afghan situation. And last month, Putin accepted an invitation to attend the opening ceremony of next year's Beijing Winter Olympics in person. Economic ties are also growing. Trade exceeded $100 billion in 2018 and has increased despite the pandemic. In the first 10 months of this year, trade in goods reached a record of $115 billion, topping the whole year volume of 2020. The two sides are working closely in science, technology, and energy. In March, they signed a memorandum of understanding on building a scientific research station on the moon. Construction of their nuclear power plants began in May. In defense, the two nations conducted a number of joint military drills this year. Their navies conducted their first joint cruise.
Relations between China and Russia have grown stronger over the past 8 years. The world is changing, but as we look at the fundamentals, the bond is like going upstairs. It only ever goes up. It's the epitome of great power relations.
There are also a number of cultural programs between the two countries, like language centers and youth forums. Wang Haiyang, CGTN.
A massive fire has broken out at Hong Kong's World Trade Center. At least 12 people have been taken to hospital. About 150 remain trapped and are waiting to be rescued from the 39-story building. Initial reports suggest the fire broke out inside an electrical room. Well, Haitian Prime Minister Ariel Henry has visited a hospital in the country's north where those injured in a fuel truck explosion are being treated. At least 75 people died in the blast, which took place on Monday night in the country's second largest city. Jane Handy Tibbert has more.
So this accident happened while the truck was trying to avoid a coming motorcycle, and then it overturned. So quickly, people in the neighborhood rushed to the truck to collect the leaking fuel. And that's where the explosion happened, and a very big blast that killed 60 people on site. The death toll for the day came up to 75 people dead. A large area in Cap-Haïtien was totally burned down. You know, Cap-Haïtien is one of the oldest city in Haiti, with a lot of old houses, wooden houses from the colonial era. So a lot of these houses burned down completely. Cars in the street, motorcycle, and of course, a lot of people died. So 60 people died on the scene during the blast, and 15 people died from their injuries at the hospital. The hospital in Cap-Haïtien is overwhelmed right now. They don't have enough medical supply. They don't have enough bed to receive patients. So right now, they are evacuating the injured people to other hospitals in other cities like Hensh, like Mirbalais, where they have a big university hospital, and some to Port-au-Prince, who will be taken care of by Doctors Without Borders.
The United States has reported more than 800,000 COVID deaths, the most of any nation worldwide. The country remains the worst hit by COVID-19, accounting for nearly 20% of COVID cases globally. It's facing a winter surge in infections due to the Delta variant and the added threat of Omicron now. The latest data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention shows new cases in the U.S. have increased around 45% over the last month. Omicron infections have been found in more than half of U.S. states. Drug maker Pfizer says its new antiviral pill protects against severe illness for all strains. Jagruti Dave reports.
With a cumulative total of more than 50 million COVID-19 cases and around 1,200 deaths now occurring every single day, US lawmakers and health officials are redoubling their calls to Americans to get their boosters and to those millions of still unvaccinated Americans to go and get their jabs. Several US states have also begun reimposing COVID-19 curbs because of fears of concerns about the new Omicron variant of coronavirus. California has become one of the latest states to reimpose indoor mask mandates, motivated in part by fears of a spike in cases across the holiday period. It follows New York and a handful of other states who have also reintroduced compulsory face coverings in indoor public places. Now, the World Health Organization is warning that Omicron is spreading faster than previous strains, but a new South African study suggests it may cause lower rates of hospitalizations. Early data from the private sector study also shows that 2 doses of Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine may be less effective against Omicron, offering just 33% protection compared to the 80% protection against Delta. The double dose, however, did provide 70% protection against hospitalizations, but this too is a drop when compared to Delta. Now, experts say further investigation is still needed before drawing firm conclusions. And at the same time, Pfizer has released promising results about its new COVID-19 antiviral pill. Data says that it is 89% effective in preventing hospitalizations and deaths among high-risk adults when a pill regimen is begun within days of showing symptoms. Now, Pfizer says the drug, which is to be sold under the name Paxlovid, should also be effective against Omicron. And Pfizer has applied to the US's Food and Drug Administration for emergency use authorization. Jagrati Dave, CGTN, Washington.
Well, that's it for this edition of The World Today. Angela Coppola is standing by in Johannesburg, South Africa, to bring you some of the top stories making headlines across Africa, coming up next on Africa Live. Please stay tuned.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The WHO's chief warns against underestimating the Omicron variant. Libya's election commission delays release of list of presidential candidates. And the WHO investigates unidentified disease after nearly 100 people die in South Sudan. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers. Here are more stories making headlines. In business, South Africa's cost of food and other basics surges as fuel prices soar. And in sport, former Nigerian coach Egwevan takes over as interim coach following a roar dismissal. Well, Chinese President Xi Jinping has met with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin via video link. It's their first virtual meeting since June. China's foreign ministry says the two leaders will summarize the development of bilateral relations and cooperative achievements. They'll also to discuss major international and regional issues of mutual concern. During the meeting, Putin said that he looked forward to meeting President Xi in Beijing and attend the Winter Olympics. Well, the WHO is urging people to not dismiss the Omicron variant. The body's Director General says the variant has been detected in 77 countries so far. He noted that even though mostly mild cases have been recorded, the variant could still overwhelm health systems. The Omicron variant is a highly transmissible mutation of COVID-19. It was first recorded and reported by South African scientists.
Omicron is spreading at a rate we have not seen with any previous variant. We're concerned that people are dismissing Omicron as mild. Surely, we have learned by now that we underestimate this virus at our peril. Even if Omicron does cause less severe disease, the sheer number of cases could once again overwhelm unprepared health systems. I need to be very clear. Vaccines alone will not get any country out of this crisis. Countries can and must prevent the spread of Omicron with measures that work today. It's not vaccines instead of masks. It's not vaccines instead of distancing. It's not vaccines instead of ventilation or hand hygiene. Do it all. Do it consistently. Do it well.
Well, a team of Russian scientists has arrived in South Africa. The team is looking to study the newest COVID-19 variant, Omicron. Their visit comes following an invitation from President Cyril Ramaphosa to BRICS member states. Brazil, China, Russia, and India, alongside South Africa, are part of BRICS. Ramaphosa invited the member countries to send scientists to conduct research alongside South African experts. Well, we are now joined by CGTN's Angelo Coppola, who is in Johannesburg for us for more on that. Hi there, Angelo. What more can you tell us about the nature of the visit by these Russian scientists? And also, some are just asking, is it just an exchange of information that we're to see to take place, or is it a chance to better study this new variant?
Well, Hannah, what we know is the fact that the group of virologists and specialist technicians arrived in the country earlier this week. Initially, the Department of Health denied that they were actually on the way here. Then they turned around and said they were actually coming through, and they had in fact landed. So there's some infectious disease experts on board as well as doctors. And they're all from the sanitary watchdog in the Russian Health Ministry. And that's the Emergency Ministry's task force that's here now. They've also got a mobile lab. The official line is that they're here to help carry out joint research with their South African colleagues, and there's an exchange of information about combating the virus. As I said, the Department of Health said they didn't know anything about it, and we do know, in fact, that their vaccine, Sputnik, wasn't granted permission to be used in South Africa based on the lack of information that they were receiving from Russia at that point. So as it stands right now, it looks like they're doing some research as part of the BRICS initiative. Whether there's a data grab that's happening or information that's being gathered to present to the South African authorities at SAPRA, we will have to wait and see how that plays out. Hannah?
On the issue of vaccines, Angelo, we're also hearing about this latest study showing that the Pfizer vaccine has been reported to be less effective in South Africa at keeping people who are infected with the virus out of hospital since the Omicron variant emerged last month. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, we know that it has been reduced. We've seen the numbers. That research was unveiled by Discovery, a health insurer in South Africa, yesterday, and they were working in conjunction with the Medical Research Council. The health insurer says that the Omicron infection accounts for around 90% of new infections in South Africa today, and it's displaced the Delta variant. So they've confirmed that data. We do know that vaccinated individuals who received that Pfizer 2 jab had 33% less coverage or protection against the new variant, and that's based on data in the first 4 weeks of the Omicron-driven fourth wave that we're in. It also represents a significant drop from the 80% protection that was afforded during the Delta variant for those people who've been vaccinated. Apparently, the results shows that these same vaccinated individuals had 70% protection against hospital admission in this time period. So it was 93% during Delta, but the experts say that 70% is still a good protection percentage. Encouragingly, though, it also shows that protection against hospital admission has been maintained across all age groups. Hannah?
Thank you so much for all that, Angelo. Angelo Coppola speaking to us from Johannesburg, South Africa. Well, let's head over to Nigeria now, where the government there is putting its travel ban retaliation plans on hold. This comes barely 48 hours after it had issued a press release to ban inbound flights from the UK, Canada, and the UAE. The sanctions that were to take effect this Tuesday are withheld to allow for further negotiations. CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam reports from Abuja.
A 9-month-long tit-for-tat between Nigeria and the UAE has left many passengers like Chini Joe hanging in the balance. What started out as a row over COVID-19 testing protocols by UAE national carrier Emirates culminated into its ban from entering Nigeria. The UAE is among other countries that added Nigeria to their travelers' red list over the new Omicron variant, actions which continue to heighten the uncertainties for travelers like Chini.
I was supposed to go and buy goods that I will sell at this time because this is like peak period for my business. So that has been greatly affected.
Nigerian government had already primed its retaliation and scheduled Tuesday to begin banning flights from the UK, Canada and Saudi Arabia. But it's rescinding its decision and instead opting for diplomatic resolutions.
While each country is entitled to put in place measures to protect its citizens, Nigeria has similar responsibilities as well. However, based on existing relationships, Nigeria has initiated diplomatic steps to make these countries reverse their course. This is ongoing in the interest of all parties concerned, and we expect that positive results would emerge within the next 1 week.
Experts believe that though the West African nation has a duty to protect its sovereignty and integrity, there are no winners in a tit-for-tat.
When you continue to promote travel ban, you are reducing potential financial growth. I believe that Nigeria should be diplomatic, which I've seen that federal government of Nigeria is doing with the rest of the country, and also put on the table a countermeasure.
Already, the imbroglio has cost governments and businesses millions of dollars, according to Nigeria's Travel Agencies Association. For now, Nigeria says it would defer its pronouncement until December the 20th, with hopes of an amicable resolution. Kelechi Mekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
South Sudan has been facing widespread flooding since May, which has affected many people and their livelihoods. Local officials report that over 835,000 people have been impacted by the flooding in 33 out of 78 counties as of the 8th of December. The states of Jonglei, Unity, and Upper Nile remain the worst affected areas, with some 80% of the hardest hit people there. Floods have displaced thousands, many of whom have taken refuge on higher ground within their counties. Homes, nutrition and health facilities, water sources, schools and markets remain submerged. The UN says the flooding has hampered people's access to essential services.
The flooding here has now reached a level never seen before, and it keeps rising. Schools, homes and livelihoods are washed away. The United Nations says more than 800,000 people have now been displaced by the flooding across South Sudan. Bentiu in the north of the country is the worst hit area so far. The local government says more than 90% of the state's population is displaced and relies on food aid.
The food given to us by the United Nations is not enough. When we get the food, it finishes before the next distribution date. Another issue is there's nothing else to add to the food given by the UN.
Water is now threatening to overrun the entire town, including areas where those displaced are sheltering. Authorities here say for the past 2 months, there have been no rain in this place. However, the water levels continue to rise. And now the fear is that another rainy season will come and worsen the situation. Experts say the high volume of water in the Blue Nile from Ethiopia is blocking water from the White Nile from joining the Nile River. That's what is leading to flooding here.
We feel that we should begin now to construct a better dike that can never be breached by the water should the next rainy season find us in this situation. That is the only way that will help us. We have no any other. As you can see, the entire town is taken by the water. But people still believe that the worst is yet to come.
The state government says with support from the United Nations, it has constructed more than 50 kilometers of dikes to try and secure the remaining parts of the town, but it says more work still needs to be done. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Bentiu, South Sudan.
Meanwhile, a WHO task force has been sent to South Sudan to probe an unidentified illness which is reported to have killed 89 people. The country's health ministry has reported that an unknown disease has killed tens of people in the northern town of Fangak in Jonglei State. According to local health officials, initial samples from the sick returned negative results for cholera. Well, for more on that, we're joined by Dr. Aslam Desug, co-convener at the Progressive Health Forum, which is based in Johannesburg, South Africa. Thank you so much for joining us, Doctor. We've seen an unidentified, sorry for my tongue twister there, unidentified breakout of unknown diseases on the continent. Why are we seeing this, Doctor?
Good afternoon. And I think your introduction actually encapsulated the conditions that are so common on this continent that presage such calamitous disease. Now, on this particular issue, they're saying that it's not cholera, which one would expect, but there are several other waterborne diseases which would give you similar symptoms, and it may just be one of those that we find repeatedly in times of these catastrophes. So just to provide a bigger context here, about 20 years ago, Professor Jeffrey Sachs of Columbia University penned a very important essay called The Ecology of Underdevelopment. And in it, he described exactly the conditions that Africa finds itself in that produces its high burden of disease. And not just the fact that its tropical and temperate zones are pretty extensive, but the chronic underdevelopment of the continent, its weak health systems, its often, embroilment in conflict, etc., all contribute to an inability to get on top of what are often easily treatable diseases. Of course, Africa is also bearing the brunt of not just climate change, but also the loss of biodiversity. Now, why this is important is that we find that a lot of the diseases we are seeing, whether it's HIV, Ebola, SARS, even COVID, are more zoonotic in nature. That means they jump species. And that's because of the collision between human populations and what used to be wildlife sanctuary. And this is going to increase, unfortunately, keeping Africa always on the back foot as far as that is concerned. Let me just say, though, that it's not an inevitable situation, that governments in Africa have got to get a grip on this matter. Human development in Africa is deeply predicated on managing the burden of disease of Africans. And until we get a grip on that, we are going to find this chronic sense of catastrophe all the time, constantly chasing the ability to get on top of it and resulting in our people's continuous underdevelopment.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Aslam Dessou, co-convener at the Progressive Health Forum, which is based in Johannesburg, South Africa. Let's head over to Libya now, where the Election Commission has delayed the announcement of the final list of presidential candidates until some court cases are resolved. Appeals against some presidential candidates in the election law have been filed in Libyan courts. This means the list of candidates for the 24th of December election cannot be prepared until final verdicts are reached in those cases. CGTN's Adel Mrouhi has more.
The fate of Libya's 24th December presidential election is now unclear. The Libyan Election Commission has failed to meet the deadline to announce its final list of candidates. It has also not given a specific time frame to finish that task. According to the initial plan, candidates should have had only 1 week to campaign. Now it's become almost impossible to hold the vote on time.
Unfortunately, the appeals against the presidential elections are many. These appeals have involved the judicial authority in this political race. Although it's a natural legal road, it has obstructed the vote. For this legal cycle to finish looking into these appeals, a lot of time is needed. The only beneficiaries of that are those who want to remain in power forcefully.
Appeals against the presidential vote began as soon as the Eastern-based parliament issued the election law. When the door opened for applications to vie in the polls, many factions began appealing against their rivals' candidature. So far, the Elections Commission has disqualified at least 25 politicians, including Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, the son of Libya's former president Muammar Gaddafi.
I believe the laws regulating the vote are clear. However, people who are benefiting from them are not acting according to the law, and that's why this is causing confusion. For instance, the interim prime minister came to power through the UN based on certain rules, amongst them not to run for any leading positions. Yet he did. The elections committee dismissed his candidature, but he appealed against it.
Technically, Libya's Election Commission must wait until all of the country's 10 jurisdictions' courts reach a final verdict in the election-related appeals. Only then can it announce a final list of candidates. Meanwhile, 2.4 million voting cards have been distributed to eligible voters. After making the big announcement, the final nominees in Libya's first presidential election should be given some time to campaign. That could further boost an earlier initiative by the Western-based High Council for State. It wanted to hold the elections in February. Adel Mrouhi, CGTN, Cairo.
We're staying with that story from Libya. And we're now joined by Professor Mohammed Hussein, Professor of Political Science at Cairo University. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor. Is Libya, on the back of what we've just heard, likely to delay elections, and what would be the reasons for such a move?
Well, the reason will be many reasons, actually. The interference from outside the political process, from outside Libya. The European Union is trying to object to certain candidates, the French, the Italian, the United States, etc., etc. So outside interference. Secondly, you need money. Libya needs money, and a lot of money has been frozen in the United States, and this money should be released in order for the political process to continue. Thirdly, the candidates who continue to step in and step out due to the competition between the certain candidates. I think the Libyan people are mature enough to decide for themselves without any outside interference. I tell everybody outside Libya, lift your fingers off the Libyan pie, because if you have too many fingers in the pie will be spoiled. I think the Libyan people don't need campaigns by candidates, because they know the candidates, they know their capacities, they know their efforts, and they should go ahead with the 24th date of election in Libya without any delay.
So, Professor, say Libya does decide to delay these elections for any of the reasons that you've mentioned or other reasons that you may not have. What implications would delaying the elections have on Libya's peace process?
Well, the implication would be two major reasons. One is the long political process, or the delay or the hindrance of the political process altogether. Secondly, I am afraid that Libya might slip back into political violence between the warring factions or between the competing factions, and this wouldn't be in the best interest of anybody in Libya or outside Libya. These two consequences are dangerous, and the Libyan people should decide to go ahead with the election without any delay. They should stick to the UN-backed plan for election scheduled for the 24th of December, and they don't need to campaign or candidates to campaign, because the candidates are known. And in third world countries, you don't worry about programs. You have personal candidates, you have figures, you have personification of power, and you don't need really programs competing with one another, etc., etc. So I think they should go ahead with the 24th of December election day.
Professor Hussein, thank you so much for joining us on Africa Live. Professor Mohammed Hussein, a professor of political science at the University of Cairo. Well, let's not take a short break. More coming up on Africa Live, including French troops leave Mali's Timbuktu. And Cameroon refugees fleeing to Chad as carnage displaces thousands. Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live. Let's head over to South Africa, where the Pretoria High Court has ruled that the decision to place Jacob Zuma on medical parole was unlawful. The court has ruled that the former South African president should return to jail. Zuma was placed on medical parole by the former National Commissioner of Correctional Services, Arthur Fraser. He had been granted parole on the basis of ill health. The former president is currently serving a 15-month term for contempt of court. For more on that story, Angela Kofala is back. He's reporting from Johannesburg, South Africa for us. Hi there again, Angela. The Gauteng High Court in Pretoria has ruled that Jacob Zuma's medical parole was unlawful and that he should return to jail. Well, we seem to have lost Angelo there. Hopefully we'll be able to get him back on the program. In the meantime, let's head over to Mali, where France has handed over control of its military base in Timbuktu to the West African nation's army. French troops were first deployed to the city in 2013. Jihadists had taken over the historic city, but France helped Mali regain control. The handover comes as France plans to scale down its troops' involvement in the Sahel. The country will end its Operation Barkhane, which had seen it deploy around 500,100 troops to the region. France has said it remains military committed to Mali and the Sahel, and will instead focus its efforts on strengthening an international task force to the region. Well, we're joined by Kabir Adamo, a security expert with expertise in West Africa and the Sahel region in particular, and he's based in Lagos. Thank you so much for joining us. Certainly symbolic in many ways, this move, but can Mali fend off the Islamists?
Well, not necessarily. I see it as a strategic review of the French deployment. What was the objective of that deployment? It was to contain the terrorist spread. Now, unfortunately, that strategic objective has not been achieved. As you are aware, there has been a devolvement of the terrorist groups into smaller groups. So France, I think, has responded to that by changing the focus of Operation Barkhane to work with local partners and to ensure that this new threat, as it were, the devolvement of terrorist groups into smaller groups is being addressed both at bilateral levels between itself and Mali, as an example, between France and Niger, and between France and Burkina Faso, as an example. But we must also mention the degenerating view. A lot of residents of these countries are no longer happy with France, and so it seems natural that this strategic review of the French operation is coming at this point in time.
Well, speak to us about what the future may look like for Mali. On one hand, there are people that think this could be a negative move. Other people think this could actually be a positive development for the country. What are your thoughts?
Very difficult to say. Mali is in a very tight position. It's experienced 2 coups within 1 year, and the reasons for that coup are several: the deteriorating security situation, the economic circumstances, and then recently it approached Russia. And so the circumstances within the country are not exactly stable, and ECOWAS has suspended Mali. And so it looks to me as very apparent that it will be very difficult in the short term for Mali to find stability. And so the French withdrawal, it would not necessarily support or assist Mali in terms of finding stability. But it must be mentioned that the withdrawal does not necessarily mean a vacuum. It handed over to, I think, about 150 troops, Malian troops, and then we must also mention that the UN has almost about 2,000 peacekeeping operatives that are in northern Mali. So it's not necessarily a vacuum, but whether the Malian operatives will have the capacity to fend off this jihadist is what only time would tell, especially given the circumstances that Mali has found itself. It's almost isolated by its partners in the West African coast.
Thank you so much, Kabir. Kabir Adamo, a security expert with expertise on West Africa and the Sahel region, and is based in Lagos, Nigeria. Well, refugees from a resurgence of inter-ethnic fighting in northern Cameroon have found safe shelter in neighboring Chad. They've spoken about the violence which made them flee their homes. CGTN's Joy Kirukijuma reports.
Cameroonian nationals now turned refugees in neighboring Chad. A camp outside Chad's capital, N'Djamena, is where they have found safety.
I was tortured by 7 people from the Arab community. I was seriously wounded on my back by machetes. I nearly died far out in the bush, but luckily my relatives found me and took me across the river. The conflict there has become very violent. I don't want to go back.
Authorities in Cameroon say at least 22 people have been killed since the clashes broke out in early December. This followed disputes between Arab chore herders and Musgoum and Massa farmers and fishermen.
Clashes have taken another turn with the use of war weapons. Violence is everywhere in the city, and we have seen innocent people being massacred. The Cameroonian government did not react in time to stop the violence. We were forced to cross the river to find refuge in N'Djamena. We thank the Chadian authorities because we are safe.
The number of such refugees has risen 60% in the past week. Chad's Minister of Territorial Administration says this has put substantial pressure on local communities, which were already facing food shortages.
The government will provide security and medical care for refugees in critical conditions, but for the others, we will need international and humanitarian organizations to mobilize so that everyone has access to the basic necessities. We must show solidarity with our Cameroonian brothers who have found refuge here.
The United Nations Refugee Agency, UNHCR, says it is responding to the crisis and admits the situation in the far north region remains volatile. Government officials say security forces have been sent in an effort to restore calm in the volatile region. Joy Kiruki Juma, CGTN.
Well, we'll revisit that story from South Africa about the Pretoria High Court ruling that the decision to place Jacob Zuma on medical parole was unlawful. And for just more of what that might mean for the country, we head over to Johannesburg, where Angelo Coppola is standing by for us. Hi there, Angelo. The Gauteng High Court in Pretoria ruling that Jacob Zuma's medical parole was unlawful and that he should go back to jail. What does this mean?
Well, the ruling came out around 2 hours ago, and the state prosecutor says that he takes no joy in sending a 79-year-old man back to jail, but he says that due process wasn't followed. Analysts are already saying that the ruling will probably be appealed by Zuma's legal team, and so that process continues. The courts, unfortunately, now go into an annual recess. They go into the holidays and are only likely to open in mid-January. It probably means that Zuma is most likely to stay in jail until his appeal is heard, and that's if the appeal team decides that this isn't an urgent case, although they probably will do because they don't want him to be in jail longer than he has to be. So the courts are due to go into recess, as I said, in the next couple of days, and it's still unclear when that appeal will be heard, if at all this year, because we believe the courts are going to close in the next couple of days, in fact, probably this afternoon. So there's a real sense of urgency by his legal team to get to the courts before they close. Hannah.
Thank you so much for that, Angela. We'll continue to monitor that story and bring you updates as they come in. We'll be staying in South Africa, and rising fuel prices there are driving up the cost of most basic commodities in the country, making it difficult for many to get by. Food prices have seen the sharpest rise, with most South Africans already spending a big chunk of their income on that. CGTN's Dimitra Naidu takes a look at the latest household affordability index.
Fuel prices in South Africa shot to a record high this year, in line with higher oil prices. Motorists are now paying around $1.33 per litre of petrol. This has filtered through to all industries, having the largest impact on food.
Over the past year, we have seen the petrol price, the fuel price in South Africa increase by over 30%. Fuel is such a major input into the productive and manufacturing process that it inevitably, when there's an increase in fuel prices, it increases almost everything in the economy that is produced.
The situation is worse in Johannesburg, the economic capital of South Africa. Being inland means higher transport costs. According to the latest Household Affordability Index, the average basket of basic goods rose 6.3% in November compared to last year at the same time. On a month-on-month basis, the price of the basket was lower in all other regions except in Johannesburg.
We have to look at household expenditure versus household levels of income to see at what stage there is affordability. And so we have to look at, for instance, the most basic household expenditure. Electricity prices over the past year increased by about 15% across the country. We have seen transport increase by roughly around 8% across the country.
A basket of basic food items came in at $285 last month. Experts are expecting this to be higher over the festive season.
When I revisited my banking app, I actually noticed that over the past 2 months, the bulk of my spending seems to emanate from food and food alone. Because of these fuel price hikes, I travel less frequently now because I've found myself having to pay 200 to 300 rands more to fill up my car, It's ridiculous.
Meat and liquor prices have also escalated.
Going into the festive season, we expect that will have a negative impact on shopping activity. So retail sales for November and December aren't expected to perform that well compared to at least where we were last year. And if you also combine this with the fact that we are now starting to see interest rates rising.
With the impacts of COVID still weighing heavily on the workplace, there's likely to be less cheer this holiday. Some experts believe fuel prices will rise further in the new year as more industries start to scale up again. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Your sport news is coming up after this short break, including former Nigeria coach Eguavoen takes over as interim coach following a Roar dismissal.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
We kick off our sports coverage in West Africa, where the Nigeria Football Federation has sacked the coach of the country's senior men's national team, Janot Hoa, former Nigerian international and one-time coach of the national team. Augustine Eguavoen has been appointed in his place on an interim basis. Hoa's sacking follows a series of poor showings by the Super Eagles in recent matches. CGTN's Deji Badmosi has more on that story.
The sacking of Gernot Rohr does not come as a surprise. The German coach had been leaving on borrowed times following mounting calls across the country for his removal, especially after the Super Eagles only managed to make it to the playoff stage of the 2022 World Cup qualifiers. The team's performance had been far from impressive. Many doubted things were going to improve with Rohr's continued stay as the coach.
His style is archaic. He does not have a playing pattern. He does not have a system. In fact, we played Cape Verde not long ago. If you ask me, a journalist since 1992, to describe how Eagles played Cape Verde in Lagos, I will not remember because there was no classy moment, no color. The chemistry was not there. The playing pattern has been lacking. It is not there. It is not there.
NFF President Amadou Pinnick says the decision to dispense with the services of the German coach was to avoid, quote, a disaster, and that it was a collective one. His replacement and former Super Eagles captain Austin Eguavoen is not a new man on the job. He was coach of the team when it finished in third place at the Africa Cup of Nations in Egypt in 2006. He will now take charge of proceedings as the team prepares for the AFCON, which begins in January 9th in Cameroon.
I can understand the choice of Eguavoen. I think it's a situation where you feel that at this time, with 4 weeks in the Nations Cup, you needed, I've advocated to that, probably a Nigerian to step in as an interim manager. He knows the terrain, he knows the players, and he can how do I put it? He can evolve or merge into the situation easily.
Over the years, he's also been able to, get some experience outside the country, and of course, he's now. We need to also put that into point of view. He's now the technical director of the Nigerian Football Federation, and you just don't get that kind of position if you are not good enough. They must have had interviews with a lot of other coaches who could have taken that job, and he was the one that was picked, alongside Paul Aigbogu. So we are in a situation where we don't have any choice because we needed somebody to quickly just, take over the team.
Gernot Rohr was appointed coach of the Super Eagles in August 2016. He oversaw 54 games as coach of the team, winning 28, drawing 13 and losing 13 as well. He also led Nigeria to the 2018 World Cup in Russia and the 2019 AFCON in Egypt, where the country finished third. Even though he has been appointed in an interim capacity, Austin Eguavoen will come under enormous pressure to ensure the Super Eagles does well in the coming AFCON in Cameroon, because the expectation in him will certainly be no less. Deji Badmosi, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
In the English Premier League,